I will open this session, first of all, by saying that something that I shouldn't really say, and that is that I'm going to talk to you about something that probably you've heard about, that you've already know. And if you're a non-native teacher, it's not something that you haven't experienced for yourself, I'm guessing. So I'm going to give this short talk, however, because non-native teachers need to know that they're not alone against this battle of discriminatory practices in ELT. For those of you who have instead been lucky enough to work in a country or a place where your qualifications were taken into consideration and you've had equal job opportunities based on those qualifications, I think you will be surprised to find out about my personal experience teaching English in Parma, Italy. There are many misconceptions. Let's start by saying this about English language speakers. And mainly, I think they've begun since, I assume, but your assumption is as good as mine, that someone must have stated that an adult person can't acquire a language the same way that a child can, a child specifically born in an English-speaking country. I don't want to start a debate over this because, everyone has their own opinion, but I firmly believe that the existence simply of bilingual children or polyglots disprove this myth. What this misconception, I think, personally has brought, it has brought about this, that this non-native category of speakers feel the need that they have to justify why they speak English and how is it that they've acquired this language to a certain degree or extent. So first of all, we, and I'm going to include myself in the category, we feel the need to justify why it is we speak English. And we do that by saying, I've lived here for a tot amount of time. My husband is British, or any excuse we find, which would be a filler of conversation. Personally, for me, for the longest time, it's been, yes, I'm an Armenian, but I've always lived abroad and, added all the relevant information to credit my experience. Secondly, in order to prove we are apt to teach, and even though we are not mother tongue speakers, we've sought formal training of some sort. And whether it was because we are required to, or we feel we need to have the right certification to avoid having to deal with people telling us, you're not good enough to teach English, we've sought to, get the formation that we needed. This, in fact, I think has had a positive outcome, since the non-natives have always, they've never improvised being a teacher. And I say that with the utmost respect to native teachers, while we can say that the opposite is true. Then there are the remarks of how non-native English speakers can't teach the right RP. We spoke about it earlier today, and a general preference between, British English pronunciation, American pronunciation, as though these were like the only varieties that we're allowed to speak and we're allowed to, spread and teach. Finally, in the ELT world, as a non-native speaking teacher, you always feel like you don't belong, especially when you have native colleagues, and unfortunately this is true, who stress how they know more about British or American culture. And again, we can argue that to learn about a country's culture has little to do with teaching English as a second language. One might communicate in English yet not be a Brit or dislike the American culture. And I think that unless a student specifically asks you to teach them about that specific culture, I don't see how the L2 English teacher would need to become an expert in cultural studies. I think that is a totally different topic or subject to teach. So having said that, I would like to tell you a little bit more about my personal experience in my personal journey in teaching English. And that is that I started as an unqualified teacher because a private school from Bologna contacted me, and they were happy enough with my accent, I guess. And they invited me to do some company courses, and I was desperate enough to accept it simply because I didn't like my job at that time. So I said yes. But it didn't take long for me to decide. I had a colleague at that time who spoke well about the CELTA qualification, and I did just that. as soon as I had saved some money working as a teacher. So when I had completed the course and I went to Seville, I had high hopes for landing like more important jobs. Now that I was qualified, I felt that, I had something to my name, but unfortunately, it wasn't the case. Even after the Delta in 2018, there was no sign of any recognition or a promising salary. So I would say that it didn't give me any sort of new fields to explore. These were also the years that I tried to gather more information and more material for what I'm currently doing, which is denouncing basically the malpractices in the ELT world in general. Those practices that deny you of, qualified teachers getting a good teaching position based on their skills and not their origin. So since 2011, I have only had personally private company courses, hourly or monthly contracts, many private one-to-one students, and I've gotten a lot of satisfaction from that, I have to say. 2 years ago, I worked at an international school as a substitute teacher. And I was told here that, I had to do an IELTS test in order to prove I was proficient. And they understood what the Delta qualification was, but CELTA was more popular within the institution, and it was valued more. I decided that in order to have a permanent job placement, I had to go through the Italian system and get a job in a public system per se. And so I got a master's degree in languages, and here I studied English as the first language of choice. I had to choose a second one, which was Spanish, and this was all very informal in the sense that the university didn't and still does not provide any certificate that states that you know English to this level. So it's just the course that states this is a C2 level or C1 level. So it doesn't really give you any paper. Needless to say, it was very theoretic for me. Like, I finished it this summer, but apart from some literature, I can say it didn't add to my teaching experience as much as my Delta course did. So what I'm asked to do today, so after having done all that, is to show my passport, state my citizenship. This has been something ongoing. I've been asked this a month ago by a recruiter over the phone, and they still do ask me. I'm currently substituting again in a secondary school. They've asked me to take the IELTS test and get a foreign qualification from abroad. So having studied in Italy is actually something negative in Italy. It's absurd in my opinion, I think this is totally absurd, but then I would love to hear from you and have you tell me a little bit about your own experiences if you are a non-native English teacher. So I got comments on my CV as not being up to standard or strange, given that I've studied in Italy since the age of 15, and with great hesitation, I've added information to my resume stating that, I've studied in an international school in Malaysia. I've completed 5th grade in California for the sake of sounding more cosmopolitan. It's this kind of conversation, that I often feel like when I'm having these conversations, I feel like I haven't invested my time and efforts well. But having had these judgmental remarks, I was able to gather a lot of material in my so-called angry file or personal battle. And it's still sitting here on my desktop, and slowly, I've gathered this material over the last 5 years. I'm doing something about it today. I think the picture depicts, those people who have invested a lot of money and time on their qualification yet have gone nowhere. What I will be doing in the future and what I'm currently doing now. So I would say that I'm having constructive conversation is the most important thing. I do this with whomever that's willing to listen. I recently spoke to the recruiter I told you about, and I made it clear that this was not something that I was willing to state. My nationality shouldn't come into play when we're talking about a job position. I will be speaking at events such as the EA-Quals and the IE-TEFL conferences in 2022. As scary as that might sound for a newbie like me, because I've just started this, but I can't wait to build a network around this topic. On paper, it has been said that this type of discrimination shouldn't exist. We all know this, but I think that we still have a long way to go, because in reality, it still goes on today. So I really hope that achieving equal considerations as a native speaker, it's somewhere around the corner. So I'm looking to publish also articles and materials on this topic. I'm working towards a better position and opportunities myself. And one of my main goals is to become a speaker and an equity advocate on this topic. I'm active on social media. I'm building a YouTube channel, a blog for new teachers who might be frustrated, as I was when I began my career fighting against this. So I'd like to summarize by saying this, that, in my description, it said that, who benefits from this false belief that native speakers are better than non-native teachers. I personally don't believe anyone benefits from this. I think that the narrative for the longest time has been that you need to be a native speaker in order to speak well. And the concept, like to invest more time to educate people who are more convinced, who are just convinced that, and they have been convinced for the longest time, that a mother tongue speaker is better for so-and-so reason. It's hard to, retort to your customers if you're an association or a private school, and you don't want to start off on the wrong foot. It's always hard to start new conversation, but my wish for the near future is that we all start addressing, no matter if you're a non-native or native speaker, address the elephant in the room and make hiring qualified teachers, whether native or non-native, the new narrative. And if you feel like sharing your experience with me, that would be great. And these are the addresses. I also have a website, the non-native speaker. You can go in and see what I've written so far on the topic, and you would find some material, but like I said, I just started this past 2-3 months working on it, so it will be great to hear also your points of view on the matter. And thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. It is a touchy subject, and I'm sure non-native teachers, myself included, can relate to that. We have a few questions, and yes, our audience fully supports you. That's fantastic. Have you ever had resistance from the students themselves? And if so, how do you deal with that?
I have had from students that I haven't had, like people would call me from ads, and they would say, you're an English teacher, fine, where are you from? And I always found that it depended on my mood on that day, because, having people judge you on your nationality for doing your job, it gets hard sometimes. And sometimes you get even too feisty about the topic, I think. So normally with companies, they would say, just don't say where you're from at the beginning of the lesson, like introduce yourself, start speaking in English, and then do it. But with elementary students, which I find even more absurd, or beginner students who would speak in Italian with me, they would feel that my Italian level would discredit me in the first place. Like, how can you speak Italian so well if you're an English teacher? So they're used to hearing an accent from a native speaker. And I always say I have an accent in any of the languages I speak. So I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but that's just who I am. So yeah, I guess it just varies from situation. If my employer would say, don't say it, then I think in the past I wouldn't. Now I kind of highlight it and say, this is me. I'm from Armenia. I was born there. My parents were Armenian. I'm not just going to say, oh, I'm of Armenian origins and leave it at that, as though I've lived all my life, somewhere else. I don't think that's necessary. However, sometimes you do have to adapt if you want to get a certain job position. Like I admitted that I had adapted my CV to have, to state this irrelevant information, like where you studied in your 5th grade. Who has that on their CV, honestly? But it does get me the opportunity, because otherwise I don't seem cosmopolitan enough.
Thank you for that, Mary. Very good question as well. What do you think is the best way to communicate the message so that it's heard and inspires action?
Well, I hope that what I'm doing currently does just that. I think that the more people open up about it, and the more teachers respect each other as much as not to criticize each other for their accents. And I think that we're constantly talking about the topic. I don't think you can avoid it, honestly. We can't keep thinking that Canadians, Australians, or whatever X, Y, and Z countries are the only ones that have English as their first language, and then you're excluding, I don't know, Malaysia, Singapore, India. It's just weird to have this. I think that the more we talk about it, the more we normalize that qualifications are just more important than simply being a speaker of that language. I often with my friends, yesterday I had a dinner and I was explaining, why this was wrong in Italian. And I said, well, would you be willing to go and teach Italian in England? Would you do that? Would that be normal to you? So make it, I think, about them, and make like a personalized example of what that would be, how absurd it would be if that was, required of you, and how you would.
Your birth certificate is not a qualification. Yeah. To
yes.
put it that
yes.
way. Yeah.